Stumps and Stories podcast with Nishad Pai Vaidya.
Hello and welcome to Stumps and Stories, where we discover different stories from the world of cricket. If you're joining us on any listening or podcast platform, do make sure to subscribe to Stumps and Stories. And if you're joining us on YouTube, then subscribe to us on Digital 2 Sports. On this episode of Stumps and Stories, I have someone who has seen me from my earliest days and has been a really great friend. Now, let me tell you a little bit about him. He used to play junior cricket and then ventured into the world of sports commentary. He is a cricket commentator, an award-winning cricket commentator at that. And I must say he has worked with BBC, SEN, and a lot of other agencies. OMG, right? But at the same time, I must tell you that Nikesh Rughani is a very dear friend of mine. And I think we bonded during the World Cup in Australia over a lot of beverages along the Swan River and endless chats on cricket. Now, if you talk to Nikesh, he's of course Indian origin, speaks with, obviously, if you hear him, you feel it's a very good British accent. But if you hear him speak Gujarati, तो फिर लगता है कि ये भाषा ना साबरमती किनारे की है. But at the same time, I will welcome Nikesh on this podcast. Nikesh, thank you so much for joining me. It's been a while, but it's again great to have you talking cricket with me. And that is something that I've really enjoyed over the years.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure knowing you all these years, a pleasure being on this podcast as well. And you're right, it's 2015, that World Cup down in Australia, Adelaide, and following the India team all across, started with that match against Pakistan there. And we sort of built that friendship across that tour, and then saw each other in England and various other places throughout those years to follow. But it has been a while, hasn't it? We've not seen each other. We were just discussing before we started this recording. It's been 3 or 4 years since we've actually met in person. We've obviously kept in touch through social media and messaging and things like that. But it has been a while. It's long overdue. And hopefully, fingers crossed, we'll meet someday soon.
Oh, absolutely. I was hoping that during the 2023 World Cup, you'd land up in Mumbai, but that didn't happen because I was based in Mumbai. Unlike the previous World Cups, I wasn't traveling and I was just doing my commentary in Mumbai. But coming to the 2015 World Cup, my first question to you is actually related to what's in the background. You've got a Tendulkar jersey sort of a thing, which is signed. Now, during the 2015 World Cup, you interviewed Sachin Tendulkar at Melbourne. And I remember that very clearly. We were in this packed house that day. I think 86 or 87,000 people watching India versus South Africa. Sachin Tendulkar had retired in 2013, November. It wasn't long after that you were talking to him. And what was that like? Because Tendulkar is someone that even you grew up watching and you enjoyed watching, I must say.
Yeah, and look, I'll take it back a little bit before the 2015. We'll get to that in just a moment. But yeah, grew up watching him, idolizing him. The first time I really saw him play properly was a few years into his career, because in England, we didn't really get live Indian cricket over here telecast. And we used to get highlights sometimes on a Sunday afternoon on Channel 4. They used to show some clips of matches that used to take place around the world. So you see little snippets, but the first full series was probably 1996. And I was sort of 11 and a half years old when they came over in 96. And I got to see the great man play. And from then on, it was just, he was my absolute idol. And, venturing into sports journalism and sports reporting and things like that, there have been a few occasions right at the start of my career where I was sent off to interview maybe a footballer or somebody from a different sport. And I thought I might get a little bit nervous when I meet them, but it never actually happened. I sort of overcame that. I thought, look, I'm here to do a job. You're a person, I'm a person. We're both human beings. Let's just get on with it and keep things professional. I don't want to be, a fanboy or anything like that. The only person that I ever got a little bit nervous to meet was Sachin. And that was well into my sports career. That was in 2014 when he launched his book, and he was doing his book signings in London, and the BBC got offered an exclusive interview with him. So I was sent to Lord's. It was one evening I think it was November. So, the days are quite short in terms of daylight in England. So it was quite dark by the time I got there at around 4:35 p.m. And I remember getting there quite early, and I'd already had a copy of the book. So I went in the pub next door and just had a read of as much as I could, really, because I'd only literally just got the book, and I thought, I know some of what's in there, some of what's been in the papers and things, but I just fascinated by starting the book as soon as I could. So I read a couple of chapters, got the text from the fellow who was organizing it from the publication company, that he's in box number whatever it is at Lord's. Just use the main entrance and find your way there. So I get up the stairs, I go to the box, knock on the door, and the person organizing it is there. And he says, right, I'll just leave you to it. Now I'm going into this room expecting there to be 12 people at least around Sachin, and it's going to be a bit of a hoo-ha, and will I get enough time with him, and all those types of things. It was literally him, his manager, and that was it, and just me and a couple of chairs, massive box as well. His manager says to me, don't worry about it, I know they've told you 20 minutes, take as long as you need, I'll be in the corner, don't worry about me. And it was literally that was the most nerve-wracking and exciting thing that's ever happened to me up until that point in my career, because I'm here with the great man, my idol, and I've literally just been told I can have as much time as I want with him. And it's a private meeting almost. It's basically me and Sachin sitting there talking like long lost friends after a little while. And he put me at ease. He was so nice. And those who've met him in person and had that sort of one-on-one time with him, those that have been lucky enough to do that over the years, will testify as well that when you actually get beneath all the hoo-ha and the thousands of fans trying to mob him everywhere, you get him in a calm environment like that. He's obviously talking about his book, his journey, his life, so it's a subject that I'm sure he enjoys. It was absolutely fantastic. And 2015, you remember that, in the MCG. It was a Google Hangout. Do you remember them?
Yes, I remember they used to be around.
Yeah.
This was
Yes.
before the YouTube lives and the Instagram lives or the Facebook lives as well.
That's right. Yeah. I mean, the Facebook lives were kind of the thing that, were popular just after Google Hangouts stopped being so. But yeah, this was a Google Plus Hangout, and there were people on the line from, various places around the world who sort of messaged in, and they got randomly picked out of a hat, and they could ask Sachin questions, and I could ask him some questions as well. But before Sachin got into the box, so this was during the interval of India versus South Africa. So brilliant match, 87,000 people at the MCG, wonderful atmosphere. And during the interval, I go into the box, and it was actually next door to my commentary box as well. And at the MCG, for those who've been there, there's sort of like glass partitions in between the boxes, so you can almost see from one box to another. So my BBC Test Match special colleagues, Graham Swan, Alison Mitchell, they're all trying to make faces at me while I'm sort of in this room getting ready for Sachin, trying to have a bit of banter and put me off. And then the person from the ICC who's organizing it says, you have met Sachin before, right? You said. I said, yeah, I interviewed him last November, and it was just a few months ago at Lord's for the launch of his book. So he said, okay, that's fine. And then Sachin comes in, as you expect, it's in a private media area, but somehow there's hundreds of people there to greet him as he enters the box. The security managed to get him into the box. And then the man from the ICC did something which I thought was going to embarrass me a little bit. He said, oh, Nikesh, Sachin, of course, and Sachin, Nikesh Rughani, don't you? And I was thinking, oh my God, of course he's not going to remember this guy who interviewed him 6 months ago in London for the launch of his book. He's done so many interviews over the years, he's met so many people. Who am I? And he said, yes, Lords, I remember. And I was like, wow, this guy remembers me. So, fantastic experience, and, lucky enough to have the jersey behind me, the signed copy of the book as well. And yeah, certainly two of my most prized possessions in the world.
Yes, exactly. Even I've got the Sachin book here, which is signed on the day of his book launch in Mumbai. But I must tell you, that's really a fascinating thing about Sachin Tendulkar, isn't he? Because I'll tell you a short story from my side. In 2019, when after the IPL, and I was a part of the IPL organizing, after Mumbai Indians won the title, I had to take some memorabilia into the Mumbai dressing room to get it signed. And I went there and Sachin was in his corner and he was the only one I was a little apprehensive to approach. I mean, we've met everyone, right? But there's just something about him because I think Andrew Flintoff put it off very well that, when you bowl to him, you bowl to impress him. And I think that's a little bit from our side as well. You want to talk to him,
Yeah.
you want to talk to impress him. So I go around and I speak to him in a mix of English, Hindi, and Marathi, and he makes me comfortable speaking to me in Marathi, and then he signs it, and I wish him the best, with the title and everything. 2 weeks later in Southampton, when we are there for the India-South Africa game, we are standing in the line for the lift. He's in front of me along with Harsha Bhogle, and Harsha sir obviously knows me, and all of a sudden, both of them include me in their conversation. And I was shocked when Sachin asked me a question, and I'm looking back, hang on, is he asking me the question? So it's an incredible thing about him, isn't it? And that really is one thing about a legend that we've seen on the field, but something that makes him special off it as well.
Yeah, they're just that aura that he's got about him. And you're right, you are trying to impress somebody like a Sachin Tendulkar. If there's all these other great cricketers that we've met over the years, and I've been lucky enough to broadcast alongside some of them, and so have you. And you've been in IPL camps and things like that when you've been working on that tournament. You've had such close interaction with some of the greats of the game. You never quite get that same feeling. When it's Sachin, it's something different. The only person that's probably come a little bit close would be Brian Lara, and another great from that era. I mean, look, Shane Warne is another one who has got that sort of greatness, or had that greatness, and God rest his soul as well. But with Warney, he would immediately put you at ease more so than Sachin. Not that Sachin doesn't put you at ease by talking to you and think, but you're still always on edge. You're always trying to impress him. He's so prim and proper and everything about him. Whereas Warney is just one of the lads. And I remember shortly after Sachin's retirement, actually, it was the MCC bicentenary match at Lord's. And the day before the match, the players got together and did a press conference, Sachin and Shane Warne as the two captains of the sides, MCC versus the rest of the world. And I was sent there by the BBC to do some interviews with some of the players. So I interviewed Dravid and Sehwag and a couple of others as well. And it was there for the Sachin and Warne press conference. And then Sachin and Shane Warne recorded something for Sky Sports, who were the host broadcaster. It was like a masterclass in how to bowl leg spin and how Sachin would counter that. And, they were recreating some of the battles they had over the years. So as soon as they'd come filming that, and it was quite a hot day there at Lord's, they'd done the pressers, they'd done interviews, they'd just done this. They were tired, right? So Sachin goes straight up to the home dressing room because he was captain of the MCC, and Warney is just coming into the pavilion where I was, just on the benches outside the famous Lord's Pavilion. And I said, Warney, do you mind? And I, again, this is something I don't really do these days with any cricketers unless I'm working with them or it's in a professional capacity. But I just thought I'm going to be a bit of a fanboy. I've met him a couple of times. I've never got a picture with him. Warney, can we have a picture? He said, yeah, right, mate, if you come up to the changing room. So I was like, all right. And then we're literally in the changing room, just me and Warney. We take our picture. He said, sit for a minute if you want, because I was obviously in awe of being in the Lord's changing room and looking out over the balcony and stuff. He just sits back, opens up a packet of cigarettes, he's puffing away, and I'm there sort of just in awe looking away around. And it's just so chilled, so chilled. So again, even with somebody like a great Shane Warne or a Brian Lara, you just don't quite get that same feeling as you do with Sachin.
Oh, yes, exactly. And that's the thing, right? With some of these greats, they carry that aura of it, Sachin Tendulkar being them. And you spoke a lot about Shane Warne right now. And I think, it's obviously we all miss him. I have not had those interactions, but I used to enjoy watching his videos or listening to him on commentary describe leg spin and those tactics. So did you have any of those interactions with Shane Warne where he told you a lot about the game and maybe a tactical thing or two?
I didn't see that side of him whenever I've been lucky enough to interact with him. And look, he was over every summer commentating for Sky Sports in the UK. So, we often got to sort of see him around, have a little conversation with him. Maybe I could have done, but it was one of those where, again, he's such a legend of the game. He's so in demand in a press box, and when you go out for lunch or tea, or you're in the bar in the evening at the hotel, and some of the former players are around and things like that. Everybody wants a piece of Shane Warne. I don't want to be that guy who goes up to him on an evening after day 3 of a test match and talk about leg spin. I would love to, as the cricket fan in me and the cricket purist in me would love to get those insights. But, I just, never quite, found myself having the opportunity to have those kind of conversations with him. But you're right, every time you heard him on commentary, and this is why he commentated all around the world for various different broadcasters, not just because he was a massive name in the game, but because he's probably the greatest captain that Australia never had, really. I know he captained on a few occasions in limited overs cricket, but never a permanent captain, and he had the brain for it, and his skill when he was bowling as well, just how he outthought batters, and it was those mind games that he played with the batters, which was so fascinating. And taken too early, somebody like a Shane Warne, but so lucky to have met him and spent a little bit of time with him.
Now, over the years, you've done commentary with a lot of players and fellow commentators such as yourself, who have not played at the highest level, but still have got the reading. Now, when you look back at this entire journey, who are some of those commentators whom you have really enjoyed with? I'm sure it's all of them, because we all have this mutual love for the game. But like, say, if you have had the opportunity of talking to someone like an Ian Bishop or someone else, what would that be like?
I mean, there's quite a few, and somebody like a Harsha Bogle, who I've commentated with most recently for SEN, both in the Border Gavaskar series in India and then the World Test Championship final in 2023 at the Oval as well. And not only is he brilliant when he's on air, I actually think he's even better on radio, because he gets that license on the radio, which you don't often get on TV, where you can tell those stories, you can fill a bit of airtime with the banter and those kind of things, which I love. But him as a former sort of, just a written journalist who then went into broadcast, didn't play the game at international level or even, Ranji levels, and, wasn't a star of even domestic cricket. It's just he's like an idol for you and I, really, in terms of that. He's a trailblazer. He's paved the way for others to be able to do so. And look, I don't think it's going to happen too often on TV. You get the odd commentator coming through, and there's a lot of females who are involved in high profile commentating on TV who haven't played at the highest game, and he's obviously been a trailblazer for all of those people, really. I think it's more difficult in TV, but even in terms of radio, it is getting a little bit more difficult, but he's shown that it can be done by just being a good student of the game, by listening to those around you over the years. So you have these great interactions, like you say, with some of these brilliant players of yesteryear who you then end up working with. Take as much of the good stuff as you can from these people. Talk to them about the game as much as you can. Talk to them about the art of captaincy, or if it's a Michael Vaughan, for example, who I've worked with quite a lot, 2005 Ashes winning captain, and as a captain he was absolutely brilliant during that era of 05 to 09, that kind of era. Absolutely unbelievable man manager, and you can see that even when you just talk to him off air, just the way he views life and certain situations in life, whether it's to do with his family or, you're talking about your family, and just advice and things like that. It's almost like he's got that captaincy hat on still, and he's such a good captain and such a good tactician when it comes to all aspects of life. And that certainly showed when he was captain of England as well. He had obviously a great start to his career with the bat, and kind of, not faded away, but his stats became very good as opposed to outstanding as they were when, say, India toured in England in 2002, and he was on top of the world and scoring centuries for fun, and did the same in Australia as well. When he took over as captain, yes, his batting suffered a little bit, but as a man manager, I've not come across many better in the game. So he'd certainly be one who I've tried to take a lot from in terms of the art of captaincy, and then you view other players like Virat Kohli, and you see some similarities when he was India's captain, and others who might go about it a slightly different way, but you can still, from what you've heard from some of these former players like Vaughan, understand why they're making certain decisions and things like that. And it helps your commentary. It helps us ultimately get that message across to the listeners as to what's going on out there. And I think that communication is such an important thing.
Nikesh, it's a very interesting thing that you mentioned Michael Vaughan and the fact that a brilliant man manager who can tell you a lot about life. And I think that's where a lot of people don't realize, those on the outside. Like, I've been lucky to work in the IPL, spend a lot of time with some real champions. It's not so much about sport that you learn from them as much as you learn about life, isn't it? And try to apply those maybe thought processes and philosophies in your own life.
Absolutely, yeah. And another one, somebody like a Michael Holding, who I've spent a little bit of time with over the years. In fact, more than a little bit of time. He's just such a lovely guy, and obviously no longer commentating now. He's retired. He's enjoying going and watching his horse racing, which is his other one true love. But always in England every summer, commentating for Sky Sports again. And you spend a lot of time with these people when you're touring around in a 5-test series or whatever it might be. And especially most recently in his last sort of 2 or 3 years of commentary, when he brought up a lot of the stories and a lot of the discrimination that he faced and the whole Black Lives Matter movement and things like that, it was very, very powerful stuff. And it wasn't just that, it was even going back years. You could see that he had that in him, and he didn't maybe express it in the way he did towards the end of his career, but you could sort of gauge how a person should be in those types of situations where you're discriminated against. You should still be proud. You should still go out and do your best, and don't let people get you down. Basically, don't let negativity get you down, and ways to overcome it, talking about it, tactics in terms of if somebody's trying to put you down in a workplace and stopping you from progressing, how you can get beyond that, and almost put that to one side and still get to your goal, which you want to achieve. And all those things which not just us as broadcasters, but people who do 9 to 5 office jobs, they could take a lot of that on board as well. And ultimately now, speaking up is so important. Don't brush things under the carpet. If you've got something to say it. And you don't want to be necessarily always aggressive about it, but depending on the situation, you go about things in an appropriate way, but never let anybody push you around. And those kind of lessons are very, very important.
Oh, 100%. And, I was telling Bharat when he was on this podcast, he's written the book on Dhoni, and one of my personal interactions with Dhoni, he sort of gave me a mantra that has really helped me in my life. He told me that in any situation, you've got a little bit more time than you think, and you don't have to panic because accidents happen when you don't think. And he said, take that extra second, even if you're in a hurry, and it'll make a world of difference. Dhoni told me that, and it's made such a big difference to my life. Any sports person or any other cricketer who's told you something and that has sort of stayed with you, I'm sure it would have been a kind of a life lesson that really stands by you throughout.
Well, a life lesson, I mean, there's been various things, not necessarily that somebody has told me directly. I mean, I'll tell you something that certainly helped me in terms of my career to start with. A great broadcaster called Pat Murphy, who still broadcasts on BBC Radio. He's sort of semi-retired. He does football reporting on Saturdays now, but he was the BBC's main cricket reporter for a number of years, and so well respected, an absolute champion of the game. And he basically, there's things like revealing who you support, right? So you're covering a football match. I'm there covering Leicester City, my, hometown, against Aston Villa, say, for example. Now, we know about bias and, not showing too much bias particularly when you're on the BBC, which is, supposedly known for its objectivity over so many years, although people might question that because now you kind of know who most of the broadcasters have got affiliations with and things like that. he said, who's your team? When I first went to, I went to shadow him doing some football reporting before I'd done any for the BBC. He said, who's your team? I said, well, Leicester. He said, don't ever say that again. I said, why? And he said, nobody should ever know. He said, who's my team? You've known me for a few years. Who's my team? I said, well, you're from the West Midlands, so I'm sure it's Aston Villa, but then actually, is it West Brom? I've heard you talk about. Oh, actually, could it be Birmingham City? Or he said, see, you don't know because I've never, ever, ever revealed it. And look, it's a little bit. I take a little bit out of that lesson in terms of never reveal too much about yourself in life if you don't need to, and if it's going to affect you down the line in any kind of way. Play your cards close to your chest until it's time to reveal. Now, I believe the world has changed now, and me being a Leicester City fan, I don't need to hide that because when I'm on air and, my job speaks for itself. I don't show the bias towards any team, whether it's cricket, football, whatever it is. You just call it as you see it, and that's that. So the world has changed because you know pretty much who supports who and all those kinds of things, and even across sports, which cricketers support which football teams, and it's difficult to sort of hide those things now, especially with social media and all those things. Gone are the days where you only heard of Pat Murphy at 3 o'clock on a Saturday afternoon on the radio, and you wouldn't see him then, and we probably would never see him if he's on the radio, and you'd only hear from him next week when he's doing his reports. Now you've got social media, you want to talk about your life, you want to talk about where you've been, your experiences, and all those kind of things. Somebody might see you wearing a Leicester City shirt, and I think that's fine. It's a little bit different, but playing your cards close to your chest until it's time to reveal those cards, and keeping them close to your chest as well. Use them when you need to. There's certain situations where, forget about supporting a certain team, but you don't want to reveal too much about yourself. You don't want to put everything out there when you first meet a boss of a TV production company that you want a job with. You tell them everything they need to know. Then enough to get that opportunity. When you get that opportunity, then bam, your first card comes out. There you go. Oh wow, I didn't know that about. It's that element of surprise and excitement that you can create in those situations. So yeah, I think that was an important lesson, and I took from it probably not what he expected me to take from it. He was being quite literal about it, but it's sometimes those things that you can get from something that somebody said. They might not even intend to give you that hidden meaning or whatever you want to call it, but you kind of make up those lessons for yourself based on all those experiences and conversations that you've had with people. So that's something I'll always remember. He probably doesn't remember that, and even if I saw him at the football next weekend or whenever it is, he probably wouldn't remember that. But it's certainly influenced me going forward in my life and my career.
But that's such a wonderful anecdote, and you've interpreted so beautifully and implemented that. And I was actually going to ask you about this, that as commentators or as reporters, one has to show neutrality, of course. And over time, I've also realized that success or failure of a sports team, you don't get really moved by it, or your own sports team, because you're able to balance yourself very well. It was a little bit different for me. In fact, working in the IPL with a team was a lot more difficult because it was after years that I was getting moved or affected by the results. Talk us about maintaining that neutrality, because you know that what's happening, you call it as it is, but then over time you learn how to deal with it a lot better, isn't it? Even off the camera or off the mic.
Yeah, look, when you're there and you're covering the match, and especially when you're doing ball by ball commentary, and it sometimes might be a little bit different if you're a written journalist and you're not so involved in the play by play of the game, and you're thinking about your opinion piece or whatever it might be once the game is over. Those feelings can build, but when you're commentating, you're doing all these stints through the day, you're pretty busy. You have to call what you see. And yes, if your team isn't doing particularly well, you have to call them out. But you don't want to call them out in the way that a fan sitting in the North Stand at the Wankhede might do. You want to do it in a way that is objective and is constructive criticism. If the top three have all got out in the same fashion and they just haven't figured out a way to play a certain type of ball, you've got to say that's a technical flaw, and you've got to be critical about that. Whereas you can't just say, oh, they're all just rubbish. You can't come out with things like that, because they're not. They're playing international cricket. They're not rubbish. So you can't let that emotion take over you. I mean, look, here's an example. We were both at the 2017 Champions Trophy final, right? And that's the only time I think I've ever been to an India-Pakistan final, right? Of anything, whether it be Asia Cups or any, and this was an ICC tournament. And not only an ICC tournament, it was an ICC tournament that India won in 2013 as well. So there was double that, plus it's Pakistan, and all that, and they'd thumped Pakistan in the group game at Edgbaston earlier on in the tournament as well. And we were just expecting it to go the same way. Pakistan somehow beat England in the semi-final. It was on a used pitch, and it suited their players a lot better, and England's style of coming out all attacking with the bat just didn't work on that slow and used pitch in Cardiff. So Pakistan managed to get through. They did very well to get through. They had a very good side, but nobody expected them to get to the final, and certainly not win it, even if they got to the final. It was all about England and then India, probably second favourites, and then maybe somebody like an Australia might come into the mix, or a South Africa or West Indies. So nobody expected Pakistan to even be there. So it was almost a foregone conclusion, wasn't it? And then to see what Fakhar Zaman did, and then to see how, all right, they got, 338, I believe it was.
Correct, exactly.
Somewhere in that, yeah, exactly. Yeah. So good memory, it's not gone yet. Yeah. I'm scarred for life. That's why. No, not really. And then India came out to bat, and you think, all right, 339 to win, that's a lot of runs. But we'd seen some previous matches in that same Champions Trophy, and particularly at the Oval, where England had been putting on these massive scores, and there was good pitches throughout most of that tournament, and scores of 300 plus were pretty common. So you thought, well, look, if India get going here, yeah, they should be able to do this. Just make sure you see off the first 10 overs without too much damage done, and that's what they didn't manage to do. So you kind of feeling that emotion. It was Father's Day as well, around the world on that day. So I'm there. I'm not with my daughter, so I'm out there working. So it's another thing that annoys you, that okay, I missed Father's Day for this. Do you know what I mean? But you can't let any of that come across in your broadcast. That's probably the one time where I felt it a little bit while watching a match, just because of all those things put into the mix together. But even then, once the match was done, it's like, all right, it's done. What next? You don't have that hangover. Whereas I'll give you an example of when I was younger, the 1999 World Cup in England again. It's the first World Cup, obviously, that I was able to watch from close quarters, with it being in England. And it's the first one that I really remember watching pretty much every game that I could. And if I couldn't watch the full game, I'd watch the highlights, and they used to have in-depth highlights on the TV in the UK back then as well, on the BBC and on Sky. So it was easily accessible. Because with the 96 World Cup, I'd probably watched most of the India games. And that was about it, really. And then the final. Not much else, really, just because of the timings of it and everything. And I was a little bit younger. So this is the first one I fully watched. I got my India shirt. You remember the 99 one, the light blue one with the design diagonally across it. I've still got those. Yeah, as it was in the 90s, it's like 5 sizes too big or whatever. I think it's still too big for me now. So you can imagine how it looked back then. And you're having all these banter with your school friends about, most of them supporting England, and there were a couple of us at the school who were supporting India, and you're having all that banter through the tournament, and then India get knocked out. And I remember sort of going up to my room after that New Zealand game in the Super Sixes, and shedding some tears and thinking, all right, we're gonna be back in 2003. But that hurt, that pain, it didn't go for quite some time. It was almost like, you've you've had a tragic loss in your family. You know, I don't want to belittle that happening to somebody, but that's how it felt to me at the time. And nothing has ever come close to that since, and especially since being a broadcaster. As I say, the closest I got to becoming a little bit emotional was 2017 Champions Trophy. But honestly, the more cricket you cover, and you know this as well, you kind of become a little bit more immune to being a fan because A, you're not sitting in the stands, you're not cheering, you can't. And you'll be happy if India do well, as will I, but you won't be jumping around and things like that. You might be if you're watching the match at home and you're not there covering it. For example, were you at I don't think you were at the last T20 World Cup in Australia, right?
No, I wasn't. In fact,
So
I was
yeah,
commentating. I was commentating it on it from Mumbai, and I guess you'll
okay.
talk about the India-Pakistan game. And it's interesting, Nikesh, when I was calling that, and I was actually brought in when over number 18 started and Virat Kohli hit those three boundaries. And the only thing I was thinking going in was, you've got to be objective, you've got to be calm, irrespective of what happens. Just enjoy the cricket. That's all I told myself. What was your
And you have
experience
to
of that?
see, I was at the time podcasting, so I didn't have anything to do until after the match. So literally, it was one of those rare occasions where I could get up. I think it was on a Sunday morning in the UK from memory, and watch the match in peace.
And sorry to
And
interrupt you, but it was actually, I think, the day of Diwali, or Diwali was the next day, I think.
Diwali was the next day, I think. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So yeah, it was, you know, and all that. It's at the MCG. There's so many fans. You kind of part of you thinks, I really wanted to be there, but you know, not to be this time. But all right, I'll watch it in peace. I'll enjoy it. You could sometimes, as a broadcaster, when you've been to so many of these matches around the world and covered so much cricket, sometimes it is nice just to be able to sit at home and watch it on TV. As weird as that might sound, you know, people say, "Oh, you got the best job in the world. You've just been to the Cricket World Cup. You've, you know, covered all these matches and seen all these brilliant games and all these brilliant players in action from close quarters. You're calling the game. People are listening to your every word when the game's going on." And you're like, "Yeah, but you don't really enjoy the game as much. You enjoy what you do. I love calling games, but you can't, as a cricket lover, just sit back and take everything in like you can when you're watching on the TV. And also when it's India Pakistan or any big India game, I don't like watching with anyone. I just like watching on my own because people get too emotional. I get emotional as well, but they, you know, when people aren't on the same wavelength and somebody gets out and there might not be a cricket anorak like us, and you know, say in yesteryear, somebody like a Sehwag might get out to a flash shot or something, and they say, "Ah, bloody Sehwag, you know, always doing this, he's rubbish. You get him out the team." You know, hang on a minute. The guy like averages 50 in Test cricket, a strike rate of 90. You know, like chill out a
Yeah.
little bit. Yeah, it happens sometimes, but you know, stuff like that would frustrate me as well. So the only person I like watching cricket with, who's on the same wavelength as me, is my dad. And you know, on that day, for whatever reason, it was an early start in the morning, so you know, I didn't invite him round. He didn't, you know, I didn't go to his house. So it was just we were just both watching it individually and sending the odd message to each other on WhatsApp. And yeah, you're right. When it got to those last few overs, I mean, the tension's building through India's innings. You think, come on, we need to get a move on. We need to get a move on. We need to get a move on. And it just wasn't quite happening. But it was never completely out of reach until probably, what was it, 48 to win off the last three, right?
Yes, that's right. Exactly. Yeah.
48 runs to win off the last three. And I thought, oh, well, Harris Ralph's gotten over. How's that going to go? You know, I mean, it was Shaheen, then Harris Ralph, then Nawaz, right?
Yeah,
So
that's
the
right.
Shaheen over went okay, but it didn't go brilliantly. It was okay. In any other situation, chasing a target, you'd think, oh, that's fine. But 48 to win off three, you needed it to go for like 25 or something, and it didn't. And then Harris Ralph comes in, and he was bowling brilliantly through his first three overs. And then, oh my God, the first
Oh,
six, and then the second six. I mean, the second six, the last ball of the over deep square leg, just made it as well. When the first one, okay, I was on my feet, I was jumping around my living room, which, you know, is quite unusual for me when watching any sport these days. And then the second six, I thought, you know what? Nawaz to bowl the final over, they made a big hoo-ha here. If they, if it was a little bit more, if those two sixes didn't happen and there were two fours, for example, yeah, maybe Nawaz can defend this. But Nawaz had been bowling terribly. I think he'd had a couple of blunders in the field as well. It just wasn't Nawaz's night. I said to myself, even before we got to the final over, 16 or less off the last over, Nawaz to bowl it, Kohli's still there, easy, easy. I mean, it wasn't easy in the end, but an eventful final over. And yeah, the emotions, man, it just the jumping around in the living room and pumping my fists. And then as soon as the match finished, I had to then put my professional head on because the podcast that I was doing at the time had a Twitter Spaces live, which I had to host. And there were going to be Indians on there, there were going to be Pakistanis on there as well. So, you have to keep a level head and not get too emotional. But honestly, the come down inside, it took a long time. It took like 24 hours for that to finally sort of reach an acceptable level of sort of heart rate and things like that. That was one of the rare occasions.
Oh, yes. And there was one more game that I must ask you about because we were there at that game. And it's one of those rare matches where I've been neutral, but I've still been moved emotionally. I wasn't broadcasting on that. I was writing about it and later was doing my video at the end of the game. And that was the England-New Zealand World Cup final at Lord's. Just the way things unfolded. And I remember telling one of our friends that this is one of those rare occasions where I felt emotionally moved just looking at the way things happened. And what are your memories of that game? What was it for you having grown up in England, England finally winning a World Cup and in those dramatic circumstances?
Yeah, I mean, where do we start? I mean, look, the day itself, obviously lots of hype in the build up. And, I remember having a quite a chilled out sort of evening before. I was staying in the hotel just across the road, the Danubius. So that was quite convenient. So just going to be a short walk. So I could see from my room as soon as I checked in, I could see the stands of Lords and sort of behind the media centre where the hotel is. So you're kind of getting in the mood already, and England being there, and the whole country's sort of finally buying into cricket as this thing which is sweeping the nation. And I remember on BBC Radio 5 Live, it was the Wimbledon final that same day.
Oh, yes.
And that got pushed aside to a different station on the BBC so that the World Cup final, the Cricket World Cup final, could be broadcast on 5 Live, which, wouldn't necessarily usually happen. But obviously, England being there, it's been such a long wait, and it looks like it's finally going to happen. And then the game itself, look, it was quite a rubbish game, wasn't it? Up until probably the last. It was. Come on, it was great. It was overcast. It was a low scorer. Yeah. It wasn't that exciting. There were a few moments, a few decent shots from both sides, until Ben Stokes looked like he was going to take England over the line in the 50 overs. And then, obviously various things happened there. And, it just the Trent Bolt catch where he put his foot on the boundary, the 5 overthrows, and, all that stuff was happening. And I just couldn't believe what was unfolding. I thought, you know what? It's just written for England to win this, and I thought they're going to do it in the 50 overs because all that stuff was happening in the last few overs. And then obviously Adil Rashid gets run out. Then Mark Wood comes out. Basically, he's got no balls to face. He comes out not only with his helmet, which is like a regulation these days that fast bowlers are on. Doesn't matter if you're not facing, you got to wear a helmet. He's wearing a chest guard. He's wearing like 2 inner thigh pads, and I'm thinking all you got to do is run. Why are you wearing all this gear? But he was so nervous, clearly, and he's even said afterwards that he just didn't know. He didn't think to take all that protective gear off. He was padded up, and he just had to sit in the same position for X amount of time until it was his turn to bat. So all that drama going on, and then obviously, it ended up in a tie. Just before that tie happened, we've got a producer coming into our box, and I was commentating on the end of that game for the BBC Asian network back then. So we've got BBC Test Match Special next door, who I now work for, and BBC Asian network. We had 5 live updates, so as they were for a sister station, 5 Sports Extra, as it was then, in our box as well. So we're all sharing like this space between us and Ellie Oldroyd, who was the reporter. She's got Alex Stewart there, and I know Alec really well, and having worked with him, he was on his, tiptoes, walking around. He was nervous. He'd obviously played in that 1992 World Cup final, the previous one, which they lost as well. So a lot of emotion from him. We've got so many people coming in now. We have a producer come in who says, right, super over regulations, here they are, blah, blah, blah. This is what happens. And we're like, all right, this could actually happen. So yeah, thanks for giving us that info. And then he says, if the super over is tied, then it will be done on boundary count. And the team with the most boundaries in their 50 overs will lift the trophy. And I remember looking at Alec and Alec looking at me, and we just laughed. Come on, mate. Like, even the match might not be tied. How the hell is that going to be tied and the super over tied? And then what's all this boundary count rubbish? So we think that's not going to happen. No way. And then obviously the match was tied. There was a little bit of a gap in between innings. I just needed to get out. I just needed to get out of the media center. It was too much. I couldn't take it. I had to go downstairs, just get some fresh air, take 2 minutes, and then come back up and get ready to commentate on the super overs as well. And I remember going out there with one of my colleagues, Atif Nawaz, and I remember Sambit Bal from Cricinfo was out there doing the same sort of thing, and we didn't know what to say to each other. We just couldn't believe what was happening in front of our eyes. It was one of those rare moments where you got 3 guys there involved in broadcast media who just don't know what to say. And then we went back up and then commentated on the super overs, and honestly, it was just absolute chaos in the box. And I remember sort of Alex Stewart high-fiving me when England had won it. Look, for me, I was able to keep a lid on any emotion, and obviously, living in England, I wanted England to lift the trophy. And New Zealand are one of those sides as well, who everybody loves, and they play the game the right way, in the right spirit, and they're always such an underdog in these competitions. I don't know why. I don't know why. People have recently started sort of saying, yeah, I think they'll be in the top 4 in the semi-finals and things like that. Only a recent thing, really, since that 2019 World Cup final. Before that, everybody would always write them off. They'd always get through, and they'd always get almost to the final hurdle and not quite make it. And 2015 they lost in the final. That was unfortunate for them. 2019 came so close, tied the game, tied the super over, boundary count did them out. So you feel sorry for them as well at the same time. But the England commentators around me, nobody could control it. And if you hear my commentary on the BBC Asian network from that day, you could literally hear people screaming in the background at what had just happened. And even next door on Test Match Special, where Jonathan Agnew was calling the final moments, you could hear people like Michael Vaughan just unable to control their emotion. And all right, you understand, he's played for England, former captain. It's a little bit different. Aggers has also played for England as well, but Aggers managed to keep his head in check when he was calling that final play. And he didn't even get too excited until the run out was confirmed on the screen, despite England celebrating and the crowd going wild. It looked out. I mean, even from our angle, from miles away, it just looked out, right? It was dead and buried. But he sort of kept such a level head on things. So I was really impressed with him. But there was a lot of people in that media center who couldn't control their emotions, and I'm sure you saw it. You were leveled down with the written press, and I'm sure you saw the same thing as well. That people were just jumping up in joy, and it was difficult on that occasion to control their emotion, not just because England had won, but because of the circumstances.
It's interesting you mentioned that, because I was actually in the overflow area in the other stand, just
right,
below.
Okay.
And
yeah.
And funnily, the people sitting next to me were Monty Panesar, and then there was Jeff Allett and Roger Twose from the 99 New Zealand World Cup team. A little bit away was Danny Wyatt, the England women's cricketer. And then there was Dilip Doshi, the Indian left-arm spinner. So we had some of these people who played the game at the highest level. And I could see how, the fans also were, getting a pulse of the whole occasion. There were a couple of my colleagues from the IPL. They managed to get a ticket and they were right next to the overflow area. So for me, it was a really great experience. And there were a few English reporters who also couldn't quite keep their calm after the last moment. And it was it was something that it looked like a nation, or at least a cricket loving public, had really waited for a really long time.
I'll tell you one thing which got me emotional, and it wasn't in the sort of same sense as pumping fists emotion, was when I went down on the pitch at the end of the game, and once the presentation was done, it was really great to be so close to that as well, to England lifting the trophy and Sachin presenting that trophy and things like that. That was all brilliant. And then Danny Rubin, who's such a brilliant media manager
Yeah.
for the ECB, usually you'd go up to him with your request. BBC as rights holders, have are able to get one-to-one interviews with a player or two, or usually one player after a match has finished, or a day's play has finished in a test match. I said, Danny, who can we get? And he said, mate, we've just won the World Cup. Just go and grab whoever you like. I don't care. So even he was feeling the emotion. He's obviously, everyone's buzzing. All the England players are out there on the outfield. You just literally go and grab them and they'll just speak to you. And then I got to speak as part of that to two people who I've known for a very long time, in Moeen Ali and Adil Rashid, two British Pakistanis, two British Asians, who I remember doing a piece on Moeen when he was at Worcestershire, before anybody had ever mentioned him coming anywhere near the England side, in about 2008, I think it was. And he was one of my, I think it was December 2008 from memory. And he was one of my sports people, British Asian sports people, to watch in 2009. So, one for the future kind of thing. So I went to interview him at Worcestershire, and that was the start of our relationship there. And Adil Rashid, I did, something similar when he was playing for Yorkshire, interviewed him a couple of times and sort of built that relationship. And we've been plugging these guys for a number of years and doing pieces with them and talking them up. And for them to then be sitting there as World Cup winners with gold medals around their neck, that felt pretty emotional. And I told Adil that during the interview as well, and he gave a great answer on sort of being a role model to basically Asian kids in the UK, and showing that it can be done. You can be there. You can be a national hero, and he's done it, and Moeen's done it, and it's absolutely brilliant. And it's not just them two doing it. There have been many who, you mentioned Monty there. There's so many players of Indian, Pakistani origin who've played for England at the highest level, who've put their heart and soul into it. And then for these two to be part of the side that actually wins the World Cup, it meant a lot to a lot of people.
Oh, I'm sure. And it's been great actually interacting with them as well. Moeen, I've had the pleasure of talking to during my role at the IPL. Just found him really sorted. I was in the same bubble as the England team during the 2021 World Cup, and I used to play a lot of table tennis with Adil Rashid, and he could spin the ball a mile on the table as well. And I asked him, "Can you just keep it out? Can you just do that on the field and let me win a little bit over here?" But really great. Like the other British Asian cricketer that I've again had the pleasure of working with closely is actually Vikram Solanki, who played a lot of one-day cricket for England, and had the pleasure of working with him at the Gujarat Titans. Tell me a little bit about this. The British Asian cricketers, we've seen a lot over the years, and some of them have really made a mark as well. And it wasn't it's like they've been role models for a larger community, isn't it?
That's right. Yeah. It's not just, I mean, look, when people identify themselves now in the UK, I mean, yeah, you've still got a service like the BBC Asian Network, which is a national radio station, and it's got that Asian tagline there. And that's been going for a number of years. But when you break it down now, there's I think less and less people identifying as British Asian. They're either British Indian, Pakistani, Bangladeshi, Sri Lankan, Afghan, wherever they're from in that region. That's what they identify as. When immigrants first came over to the UK, and you're talking probably like mass immigration from those regions, there were Indians and others living here in the 50s, and even before that, you go back to the days of British rule, and there were Indians coming over here and living and making a life for themselves in the UK. but mass immigration, and it really started from East African people of Indian origin in the 1960s. Like my father's family came here in 1967, and he was just a young boy and sort of had all his secondary schooling in the UK. So he's basically, English really first and foremost. Spent the vast majority of his life here. And then my mum's family came from Uganda in the 1970s, and there was that mass immigration from then. It was mainly those communities who made up the sort of the Belgraves. In terms of an area, Belgrave in Leicester is known as the Golden Mile. It's like a mini Gujarat now, has been for a number of years. And now there's a different Gujarati community who is predominantly living in the area. Before, it was the East Africans who weren't necessarily born in Gujarat, but just were from a Gujarati heritage. Now it's people who've come from areas like Diu and Daman, who have sort of started living in that area as well. So there's Wembley, there's Southall in London, all these areas. Southall is quite Punjabi, Wembley is a bit more Gujarati. There's areas in Birmingham as well, which, are quite Pakistani and, things like that. But when these areas were sort of first being lived in by people from those regions, they were kind of strangers in a new country. Certainly in places like East Africa, the Asian community didn't really see each other as Indian, Pakistani, or whatever else. They were just, again, Asians living in a foreign country. They all got on. They, used to go to each other's functions and all family friends and things like that. And that continued in this country. And then I think with the advent of media becoming what it is and satellite television and all those things, a lot of Indians started watching Indian channels, Indian news channels, Indian entertainment. Pakistanis watched Pakistani stuff, news channels, entertainment, and people started getting drawn more towards their own personal identity of exactly the region they've come from or the country they've come from. So people identify generally as Indian, Pakistani, Bangladeshi, and whatever else now. But you go back a number of years and, you see somebody like a Min Patel, for example. He's, spinner, played for England, left-arm spinner, poker player now, professional poker
really?
player.
I had no idea.
Yeah. And
wow.
he was like the first one that I remember from the 90s playing for England and thinking, wow. And, you can actually do this, because growing up, you do face a bit of discrimination, especially in those days. From the wider cricketing community, and you think, well, he's done it, we can do it. And a lot of young Asian kids used to feel that same way. And going forward, you then see the Vikram Solankis, the Kabir Alis, and the Saj Mahmoods, and the Monty Panesars, and the Ravi Boparas, and all these guys doing it over so many years. It does still have that impact across wider communities, even if a young kid watching that 2019 World Cup was to identify as, I'm, say, for example, 12 years old, I'm British Indian, born here, my parents were born here, but, my family originates from, say, Gujarat. And then you're watching Moeen Ali and Adil Rashid lifting that World Cup. Still, they're two brown boys at the end of the day, right? They're from, areas which might be similar to where you're from. Adil Rashid's from Bradford. Big Asian community there, mainly Pakistanis. Moeen Ali's from Birmingham. It's quite mixed there, but there are a lot of Pakistanis as well as Indians there. And you think similar areas to where you're from. You might be a 12-year-old growing up in Belgrave in Leicester, and you think they've come from the same upbringing. They've probably faced the same stuff that I'm facing. But look, they're world champions. They're being held as national heroes. And it has had that wide impact, I think, over more and more British Asians feeling they can not only necessarily play for England, but even just become a professional cricketer, which wasn't possible when my dad used to play cricket and my uncle, his older brother, was a very good cricketer and played a little bit for Leicestershire under 19s. But then when it came to time to select for the main squad for the next season and give out professional contracts, they wouldn't look at anybody with any skin color other than white, unfortunately. So that's how it was in the 1970s. And I probably could name who was in charge of Leicestershire and some of the incidents that happened, but we don't need to dig all that up at the time, right now. At the time it happened, things have changed for the better. And you look across county cricket now and you see so many British Asians either playing second 11 cricket or first 11 cricket. And it's great to see, a lot of these players might never, ever be good enough to get anywhere close to the England side, but one or two might, and that's what counts. And you look at the proportion of it, how many British Asians have played for England over the years in terms of the percentage of British Asians in the UK. You've got two in a World Cup winning squad of 15. That's pretty much correct, I'd say, in terms of proportion. So, it shows you as well that something is happening that's right in English cricket at the moment, although it has also got a lot of issues at lower levels still.
You mentioned Moeen Ali and Adil Rashid being a part of that World Cup winning squad, and they were also there in the T20 World Cup, which England lifted in Australia in 2022. And that brings me to my final question is, we are beginning a new year. It's 2024. There's the T20 World Cup in the US and the West Indies. And I think it's a big World Cup, not just for all the teams, but for cricket in general, the fact that it's going to the American market. And there are other events as well through the year that we are looking forward to. India are hosting England for a 5-match test series, and so on. There are many others. What are you looking forward to most in the year 2024?
That test series, 5 test matches against England. I mean, I just hope that England can be more competitive this time around, because it's a long old series and there's plenty of opportunity for it to be a classic. If England turn up and if this Bazball, as they call it, somehow comes off to an extent, it won't come off in anywhere near the same way as it has anywhere else in the world in India against these Indian bowlers. However, if they can pack a few punches with that and score some, decent runs at a good rate, put India under a little bit of pressure, I think it's got the ability to be a real classic. I just fear, though, that India's spin attack is going to be too strong for them on those tracks as well. And we're going to see a couple of early finishes, but look, it's never a bad thing beating England as well, is it? But I just, we're purists, right? We love Test cricket. It seems like it's been, I know we had the South Africa series. It was 2 test matches. It left you wanting more. It wasn't a great pitch. India still won in Cape Town, that second test, but 2 early finishes and it just left you wanting more. It should have been at least 3 tests, you feel, just for that decider and the fact that you've whet the appetite now. South Africa have given a knockout blow. India have risen. They've given their own knockout blow. What's going to happen next? Oh, wait, they're going home. South African players are playing SA20 and they're sending like a C-string squad to New Zealand as well. So it just whet the appetite a little bit, but there wasn't enough to sort of, satisfy you. So I'm really looking forward to those 5 test matches against England. That should be great. And look, T20 World Cup, that's going to be interesting. India, Pakistan, obviously, again in New York. And then I think India play 3 of their 4 group matches in New York as well. So, it might be known as the New York Indians or something after that particular group stage. But it's going to be interesting to see how the pitches are in America as well, in mainland US. Because we know what Caribbean pitches are like, and they'll probably play true to form. That's going to be interesting. And whether or not the American public actually buy into it, and when I talk about the American public, I'm talking about middle America and general sports fans across America, because there's a big expat community over there. And whenever cricket has been played over there, and even in Canada, going back to the 90s as well, when India and Pakistan used to play there, you just get a lot of Indians and Pakistanis who live over there who come and watch the matches, and that's where the interest comes from. So it'd be interesting to see if cricket does have that impact. Look, the US have got a team, but you look down that team and it's pretty much all expats as well. So let's see. I'm excited. It's an ICC event. It's another opportunity for India, as we have kept saying for years and years, to put the last one behind them. And this is the one, but hasn't happened for a long time now. So might be one last hurrah for Rohit Sharma and Virat Kohli as well, who look like they're going to be part of that.
Yes, and I think it's actually getting better because India crossed that semi-final hurdle the last time, went into the final. Who knows? It could be India's time. And if they are able to get everything right, then it's very much possible. But yes, I said one last question, but here's one more because this podcast will be incomplete without it. You've had the perspective of covering an Ashes series and an India-Pakistan series or India-Pakistan matches. Two traditional rivalries of the game. Which one would you pick? I know there's a lot more emotion involved in India Pakistan, but if you ask me, I think the quality of cricket in the Ashes, it's like right up there.
I don't think you can compare because
Hmm.
India and Pakistan haven't played a test series since
Since
2007.
2007. Yeah.
Yeah. So if you compare an India-Pakistan test series to an Ashes series, then I think India-Pakistan takes it because you've got the emotion plus the quality of cricket that we last saw from '04 to '07 when they were touring each other every single
Yes.
year. That was bloody good quality of cricket, and they had some legendary players playing in there, and there were some tight matches and some brilliant individual performances and some tight series. And you remember what India did in '04 there, and you know, just absolute brilliant scenes. And even in sort of '07 when Pakistan came back and Yunus Khan scored all those runs, and there's been some really good performances by both sides in each other's backyards, essentially. And then you add to it the 5 ODIs or 6 ODIs or whatever it is they used to play attached to those test series. So you
Yeah.
look at it as a tour as a whole, and some classic matches during those years as well. So if you take full tours into account and the last ones that we've seen between those two nations, yeah, I mean, look, now when we discuss India Pakistan, is it bigger than the Ashes? We can only talk about ICC matches or Asia Cup matches, and they're just one-off occasions. So you can't compare them to an Ashes series, no. But if you're talking about if Pakistan was to tour India this year in a 3 or 4 Test match series, or even 5, would it be bigger than the Ashes? Hell yeah, easily bigger than the Ashes, because the quality of cricket, you're right, in the Ashes is very, very good. And you do see a lot of one-sided India-Pakistan matches, but that's because they're one-offs and they're not a full series and they're not Test cricket. I think let these two sides go at it for each other. Will it happen in our lifetime? We don't know. But if they were to do that, and both tour each other's countries, then we'd see some proper cricket and some tasty battles, I think. And new rivalries could be born. It could be Shaheen versus Virat, and we talk about Wasim and Waqar versus Sachin and Dravid and people like that. We can't really talk about that in this era because we've got like the odd one match to go on every year or every 2 years or whenever it is. So yeah, difficult comparison to make. But look, the Ashes is brilliant, and the hype that surrounds it is massive. But I think since '05, I know there have been some one-sided series, particularly down in Australia, but overall the battle has been pretty good. And as we saw with the latest one as well, drawn series, Australia retained the Ashes, but closely fought, England coming back brilliantly, and some wonderful cricket played.
Oh, 100%. And it's just that wonderful cricket that we wait for. Nikesh, thank you so much for joining me on Stumps and Stories. I know that if we continue, this podcast can go on for hours and hours, just like the way we would sit across the Swan River and talk cricket for a really long time. So I've got to put a stop here. We hope we can have a chat again later. But yes, it's as always great to talk cricket with you.
You as well. Been a pleasure, and we'll speak soon.
To all our listeners, thank you so much for joining us on Stumps and Stories. And if you are listening to us on Spotify, follow Stumps and Stories, subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, and join us on YouTube at Digital 2 Sports. On Instagram, you can follow me at Nishad Paivaidya, and you can follow my friend here, Nikesh Rughani, as well on Instagram. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us.